So we're going to use this number right here. So buyer A offers $300,000. Escalation clause says to increase by 3,000 above any competing offer, but not to exceed 320. If another buyer offers 305, then buyer's A price escalates automatically to 308. We just bumped it by 3,000. If another buyer offers 319, then buyer A's price would only increase to 320. That didn't get bumped up $3,000 because their max limit is 320. And it says for this to work, the clause must include escalation increment, which is how much you're going to go over, the maximum purchase price, and proof of requirement that a competing offer is real. Things you need to watch for when using this: the buyer with the escalation clause can still lose if another offer is cleaner, meaning fewer contingencies, better financing, less closing costs. The escalated price may exceed the appraisal value, and they would need to understand in that case that they may need to come out of pocket to cover the difference that cannot be financed. And then sellers are not obligated to use the clause. They could just reject the offer. So if you're using the escalation clause and the seller's not interested, they can just reject your offer. It's not something they have to participate in. As the agent writing the clause, you need to be clear on all terms of the clause to make sure that you are protecting your buyer. Does anybody have any questions on that form? I know we're not seeing a lot of hot properties on the market right now, but this is good to keep in your books, once offers, properties, if you're in a multiple offer situation or anything like that, and you just want to make sure that your clients, if they wanted the property that much, that they get it. All right, we are going to move on to multiple offer situations.
Just before we do that, has anybody ever used an escalation addendum and had success with it? Or not had success with it?
I've used it. I can't remember if we were successful because I haven't lost many contracts. So, but it's a good, definitely a good security for the buyer when they really want the property.
You should all learn how to use these. It's a tool in the toolbox, and it can, like Jennifer said, right now it's not really crazy busy, but there are still agents. If a property comes on the market and it's a hot property, or you think there's going to be a lot of interest, then I think it's still something to utilize. So of course you've got to understand it so that you can explain it to your client.
All right, so moving on to multiple offer situations. The form is in the chat, the one that we're going to be reading over. This isn't a required form. You're not going to find it in SkySlope. We gave you this. This could be yours to save and download. And if you need it in the future, just contact one of us and we can get it for you as well. So what happens when you receive more than one offer for the property at the same time? What do y'all do as agents? Jump up and down. Woohoo.
Well, there's that.
I know. This is not COVID times, but they will come back one day. Never lose faith.
We just had an agent in New Orleans got 7 offers on a property.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I was showing some properties uptown for a buyer client of Adrian's, and the one house we saw got 12 offers, and
Wow.
the other got 7.
See?
Yeah, so uptown still has these like crazy bids. But I guess your question is like, you would, as a listing agent, you would call for highest and best.
Yes. So we are going to help you guide your sellers through this process because we have also had a situation where it did not work out as planned. The intention was good, it just not work out. So, so when you get multiple offers for your property, agents must also always, number one, act in the seller's best interest. We must follow the LREC rules, code of ethics, and EXP's policy, and we need to avoid misrepresentation and unfair dealing. Mishandling multiple offers is where most agents can get in trouble. So first things first, we're going to make sure to timestamp and document receipt of all the offers, and then we are going to present them to the seller. The seller needs to make a decision about their next move. Do they want to accept one of these offers? Because you don't technically have to go into a multiple offer situation. If that seller looks at 3 offers and he is clear as day, sees that this one offer is better and he would rather just deal with that, he can accept that offer and reject the 2 offers. Or do they just want to counter one offer? Or do they want all buyers to submit their highest and best offer? If the seller instructs you to just accept one of the offers presented, that's fine. Just make sure to properly notate the acceptance of that offer and sign the rejection of other offers and let the other agents know. Also would like to make point that this is very important when you're dealing with situations like this. Date and time stamp. Sometimes it comes in pretty useful. If you don't think that, just in case, we always want to make sure that we timestamp our signatures. So situation, the seller, hold on. Okay, so situation B, offer, you have 3 offers. Offer A is a strong price, but a very long closing time. Offer B is a slightly lower price, but ideal terms. And offer C is just a weak offer altogether. Seller only wants to counter offer B, which is slightly lower, but has good terms. What we need to do as their agent, we need to document instructions that were given to us by the seller, issue a counter offer to buyer B only, and do not create a bidding situation unless directed by seller. If seller wants you to ask all offers for their highest and best, then you need to contact all agents and let them know that you have multiple offers and that their buyer needs to submit their highest and best offers in writing. Some MLSs have a highest and best document that you can send to the agents, and the buyer can respond on their form if their offer remains the same, wants to withdraw their offer, or wishes to revise their offer. If they choose to revise their offer, then a new offer needs to be submitted with the new terms on it. So, and if you don't have access in your MLS, we have this form here as well that we can provide to you. Under no circumstance should we ever counter all offers with the same terms that the seller would accept. If you have 3 offers and you counter all 3 offers as the seller and sign that counter, if all 3 buyers sign that counter as well, you have 3 accepted offers.
Please don't do that.
Countering as the seller in that situation is not best practice. Contacting buyers agents and letting them know of what is going on and having buyers submit their highest and best is best practice. And of course, if you do that, it also always needs to come with a due date. So give them 24 hours or however much, time you think is needed on that in order for the buyers to submit their highest and best. And if you don't receive a highest and best back, or any notification that they're staying the same or anything, I guess when that offer expires, it expires. But I would also consider what they submitted first as their offer. So we can go ahead and look at this multiple offer notification form. It's plain and simple. We're going to put the you fill this out and give it to the buyer's agent. You fill out the property address, their initial offer date, put in your information, their information. And it says the following agent acknowledges receiving notification from the listing agent that multiple offers for the purchase of this property have been presented. In order to ensure that all parties have access to identical information, seller requires that these instructions be emailed to prospective buyer agents immediately and that each buyer's agent receipt by return email. Seller standard procedures for multiple offers is: first, we're going to inform all the parties. Each interested party is requested to submit their best offer in writing to the listing agent no later than, and then this is where you would put in your deadline. Seller will accept or provide a counter offer only to the offer that the seller determines to be his best offer. In the event the choice of the best offer does not result in an accepted purchase agreement, seller will accept or provide a counter offer only to the offer which the seller determines to be the next best offer, and so on. All offers and or counter offers must be in writing. No verbal offers will be accepted. And then if you presented this as a buyer's agent, please sign to acknowledge receipt of this fax email communication and return to the listing agent. Oops, there's a fax word in there. Email immediately upon receipt and completion of the buyer's response section below. Thank you for your interest in this property. So the listing agent would sign here, and then you, as the buyer's agent, would sign here, or whichever your role is. And then please email the buyer's response to the multiple offer notification by the deadline noted above. You make a selection. The buyer's offer remains the same, or the buyer wishes to revise their offer. See attached addendum or new offer. And then you sign it and the buyer sign it. And then you submit that if you're changing your offer with your new purchase agreement with the highest and best. And then, the listing agent will be in contact. They'll let you know if it's been rejected, countered, or accepted. Does anybody have any questions on this form?
I just want to say this might be a recording that y'all need to listen to again. I feel like that there's lots of agents, and I mean across all brokerages, that they really do not know how to handle multiple offers. And there's just a lot of loose actions going on. And I think it's always been that way. But as I keep reminding everybody, we are living in a different time in real estate. And it is super, super critical that you are doing things by the book and that you dot every I and cross every T with regard to paperwork. And this is one of those areas that really concerns me. And it's why we're really teaching on this, because I just see that people are not handling it correctly. They'll do verbal. The agent might make a phone call to the buyer's agents and say, highest and best, and what is your best? And then they'll call their client and they'll call back, and everything is this verbal stuff. All that can do is get you into you and your seller actually, possibly into a big mess. So we really want to be sure that you understand the process, how to use the form. Of course, it adds more work. It adds more work to the buyer's agent. If they're changing their price, they should write a new offer. You got to keep up with the timeline, all kinds of stuff. So now's the time. If there's any part of what Jennifer just went over that you don't understand, ask.
Yes, we are always here to help y'all out. So y'all are never a bother. Call us, come in here, ask us, because we'd much rather you have the answers moving forward than just saying, hope this works, fingers crossed. So if nobody has any questions, that's all that I have for my part on these two addendums. I am going to make an edit or two in this multiple offer form. I'll see if I can get it in the chat before the end of the meeting. So go ahead, Betsy.
And just remember, oops, am I muted or can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Just remember that form is not in SkySlope, and it's not easy for us to get forms uploaded into SkySlope. So don't think that it's going to happen. So you just need to be sure that you get it from us, download it here so that you have it and save it on your computer for when you need it. And to my knowledge, I don't think any of the MLSs have a form that I could recall.
In the Greater Baton Rouge Realtors Association has that form of notice of multiple offers.
Oh, there is one. Okay. Okay. All right. Some of them are more, a lot of times the association forms are a little more complicated. And then the other is they all haven't redone their forms since NAR. I think some of them should be redone. But thank you, Gwen. If you're in Baton Rouge, take a look at the form that's attached in the forms. All right. So now we're going to talk about contingencies. This is something I can't speak for Jennifer, but I know I get people asking me questions about contingency addendums and all kinds of different things. And so we're going to look at 3 different forms. And I'm not telling you that you can use whichever form you want. It's just collectively, I need to talk about them all instead of having one-on-one conversations. So the first one is from New Orleans. And I have to tell you this, I mean, I'm in New Orleans. This is the only form that I have learned how to use. And it wasn't until something happened that I saw the form. It was the raw form first. And then when I went looking, I saw that Baton Rouge had a form too. So want to be very clear here. The New Orleans form is very different than the Baton Rouge and the raw form. And we would love it. And I would love it if New Orleans would incorporate the other form. And I think you'll understand once I explain the difference. But I also know that in every association, there's a lot of misunderstanding about contingencies. I also know that agents do not always get very clear clarification from their client as to whether they have a house to sell or not. That has happened multiple times where either one of 2 things: the agent did not ask their buyer, or the buyer did not tell them when they were asked that they had a house to sell. The problem is when you write a contingent offer, there's ramifications to that. It's supposed to be contingent. Or if you have a house that you have to sell and you don't write a contingent offer, then you as the buyer are not protected. You know, one of my worries is that that's what happens. Then the lender at the end says, well, I can't do the loan for the new one because you have to have the old one sold, but nobody ever told their agent that they had to have one sold. So then they're getting this denial letter from the lender based on the fact that they had a house they needed to sell that was never disclosed to anybody. So that is a huge problem. All right, now as far as the paperwork goes, hopefully y'all can see this, and I think Laura uploaded it into the chat as well. All 3, just so that you can see them. Each one of them is in the Instinet or transaction desk in your association. Okay, like I said, the New Orleans form is very different in the way it works. So if we look at this, you're going to put in here at the top the address that needs to be sold, and you're going to put a date on line 8 as to when you're giving them a certain time. And then it says, it is further understood and agreed that seller, through his agent, will continue to market the property to prospective purchasers until such time as buyer, by written notification, receipt of which is acknowledged by seller, removes the contingency as a condition for performance of the agreement. I know I'm reading a lot of stuff. But what that says is the seller can continue to market the property. There's nothing in here that says it's under contract, it's not under contract, it's on the market, it's not on the market. It's just they have a house that they need to sell. They're writing the offer as a contingent offer, and that is given the seller the opportunity to continue to market the property. Okay. During the period that the property remains on the market, should the seller receive an offer that's acceptable, the seller's agent shall notify the buyer's agent in writing and notify the seller of the same. The seller shall grant buyer a blank period, and I will say what I usually see, it's all negotiable, but what I often see is 72 hours. I think that's kind of how I was taught, but whatever you negotiate. From the receipt of the seller's notification to the buyer, within which buyer must remove the contingency in writing or release the contract. Okay. If they can't remove the contingency, they get their deposit back. That's in there as well. The hour period will commence upon receipt of seller's written notice by either buyer or buyer's agent or the broker or the manager. Okay. So basically, let's just say you put 72 hours. So you're the listing agent, you get a second offer that's not contingent, or whatever offers you get. You have to always present the offers to the seller. The seller looks at it, says, I like this much better. Maybe it's price, maybe it's terms, maybe it's only because it's not contingent and the price is acceptable to them. It may even be the price is a little bit lower, but they can close in 30 days. So the seller gets to make the decision about what they want to do. Now, hear this, because this is a question that's been asked to me. If this is the form, you have to give those hours, you have to give that first buyer an opportunity to remove the contingency. Your seller cannot accept a second offer, no matter how much better it is, until you have given the first buyer the opportunity to remove the contingency. Don't assume that they cannot remove the contingency. I have seen many people write contingent offers, even though they could get a loan for the second property. They wanted to write it as a contingent offer because it was more comfortable to them. They did not want to have two houses, two payments, all of that kind of stuff, but they could. So there's definitely times where the buyer is able to remove the contingency. They can get the second loan and go ahead and buy. So whatever offers came in after, no matter how good they are, the seller cannot accept. We've had an example of that. I want to say that an offer came in, it was like 20 grand higher, but the seller could not take it because the first buyer was able to remove the contingency. Okay. Then what it says here, this is something Mark and I talked about. We find it so strange, but on line 25, and again, this is in New Orleans for all of you Nomar people, this is the form. If the contingency is removed by the buyer, all financing contingencies of this agreement are automatically removed and all other terms of the agreement remain in full force and effect. I don't like that. Mark said he has, in his own practice, crossed that out, had everybody initial that, because what that's saying is that if the buyer removes the contingency, they are obligated to buy. There's no financing contingency left. So what happens, I mean, legitimately, if something happens and they can't buy, if you leave that in there and something happens with the financing, then really they're going to be in default. So if you're in New Orleans, you're using this form, you're writing the form, my suggestion is that you mark through those lines 25 through 27, or you could even write it in additional terms, because this is an addendum that's attached to the offer. and say on the contingent offer lines 25 to 27 shall be deleted, something like that. So I wanted to point that out. And then line 29, failure of buyer to remove the contingency in writing within the time period shall cause the entire agreement to be null and void with no obligation or liability for performance or repayment of any buyer's expense by the seller except the deposit. So that's important too. So those of you who are representing buyers, the buyer is under contract. They have gone and had inspections. They've already been through the inspection process, but the offer is still contingent. If the seller gets another offer that they want to take and you can't remove it, you could lose the appraisal money, you could lose the inspection money. And all this is saying is that the seller is not obligated to reimburse you for that, or the buyer for that, only to return the deposit. So this is the New Orleans form. Okay, now we're going to look at the next one, which is Baton Rouge. And I'm not going to go over the raw one. They're so similar, but if you are in Lafayette, you need to get this contingency form out of your transaction desk, and you need to very, very carefully read this thing. Okay. All right. So the Baton Rouge form, the following paragraphs are added to the Louisiana agreement. That part's similar. You put the property address and you're giving them a certain amount of time. Okay. Now on this form, you get to choose which contingency option. It's either A or B. It is not both. So what is A? A is the buyer's property is under contract. Buyer's property is currently under contract. This agreement is contingent upon buyer's receipt of the proceeds from the sale that's scheduled to close on or before. Well, you're going to have that date. You get it from your client. A copy of a fully executed agreement to buy or sell on the buyer's property and a pre-approval is attached. We'll talk about that in a sec. Should this attached agreement to buy or sell on the buyer's property be canceled or fail for any reason, the buyer must notify the seller within 24 hours in writing of cancellation, in which case this addendum becomes null and void. So there's two things. I'm going to point out the second one first, and then we'll talk about the middle one. So the second thing is, if that buyer's contract on their house falls apart, you have 24 hours to notify the seller. I think there's going to be instances where the buyer's not going to want to do that. And they're not going to want you to do that either, because they're going to be worried. Because what does it say? It says the addendum is null and void. Okay, that means that you don't have a contingency addendum that's in place because the sale fell through. That would mean that you would need to write a new contingency addendum, which would be the second, which would be B. So I'm just pointing out there's always things that we have to do that sometimes agents forget, sometimes they don't know, or sometimes they get sloppy. And I'm telling you, not knowing and getting sloppy are not excuses for what could happen. All right. So this middle thing that I don't know if it shows up. Yeah, you can see I highlighted that. So it says if the home is under contract, you are supposed to provide the listing agent a copy of a fully executed agreement on the buyer's property and a pre-approval letter is attached. All right. I have to say I have a little bit of, I got a big issue with that actually. And if I was on the forms committee in either Lafayette or Baton Rouge, I would be discussing my concerns about that with them. And hopefully they would listen and they would change it. But I don't see how it's okay to provide a pre-approval to the listing agent on the house that your buyer wants to buy, not their pre-approval, but the pre-approval that comes from the buyer who's buying their property. I don't see how it's okay for that to be provided to the listing agent to provide to the seller. Now, if you redact it as to who it is, that would probably be okay with me. But to actually show the name of a buyer to a person who's not a party of that party to that transaction at all, I think is very problematic. I think that's personal interest. So I'm just going to give a crazy what if. Let's say something happens to that client, that buyer, okay? They're pre-approved for $300,000, but something happens and that deal falls apart. And then that buyer wants to go see one of your listings. Well, you already know they're pre-approved. You saw the pre-approval letter and you know who it is. See, I don't think that's okay. So that's my issue with that. I have the same issue with giving a fully executed contract. Again, I think that you need to redact the names of the people. Now, you may say, but Betsy, how are you proving that it's real? You know what? I'm telling you, if there's an agent that's passing along that kind of a bogus, making up a buyer agreement to show that the house is under contract, making up, getting a letter from a lender that, or typing up a letter, God help them. They need to get out of the business. I don't think we should be so jaded that we think other agents are going to do that. That's just my opinion, but I do find it pretty problematic that you would, if you were representing the buyer whose house is under contract, that you're going to give the listing agent a fully executed contract that they can see who it is, and a pre-approval of a buyer that has nothing to do with the sale of the first property. Does that make sense?
Oh, I completely agree. I've always had an issue with that too, and I have redacted information if they've requested the document.
Yeah. So does everybody understand? I mean, seriously, if y'all are confused by what I said, I want to be sure that there's clarity here if you're in Baton Rouge or Lafayette, for sure. And I'm not sure about what forms are being used. And I'm not looking at who all's in here, so I don't know where y'all are all from. But I just want to be sure that you're clear on that. Okay. All right. So let's say the property that needs to get sold is not under contract. Then you would mark B and you're going to check the box. It's currently listed or it's going to be listed. So you would fill that out. And then seller through his agent will continue to market the property. Now, if you look back, the first one doesn't say the seller is going to continue to market the property. But the second one, continue to market the property to prospective purchasers until such time as buyer by written notification receipt removes the stated contingency as a condition. I'm kind of going to skip a little bit. Seller shall grant buyer, that goes back to what's in that New Orleans form. The seller is going to grant a so many hour period from receipt of seller's notification to buyer, which buyer must remove the contingency. So the language in this part is very similar back then to the language in the New Orleans contract. The big difference, and it's a huge difference between the two forms, is New Orleans does not distinguish whether the house that needs to be sold is under contract or not. Where the Baton Rouge and the Lafayette, it's two different things. If the house is under contract, it does not allow the seller an opportunity to accept another offer. Okay? It's only if the house is just listed for sale or going on the market that the seller could accept, the seller could choose another offer and require the buyer to remove the contingency. Okay? All right, questions on any one of them? How many of you have heard the terms open and closed predication? Or who has not heard that?
I've not heard it.
Bad.
Okay. Y'all are way too, thank you for you two, Anna and Rachel. Y'all, the rest of you are way too quiet. All right. Again, I think it's probably because of the New Orleans form. So an open predicated offer is when they have to abide by the 72 hours or whatever, however many hours. Okay. And that the buyer has to remove the contingency or the seller can take another offer. When somebody writes a closed predicated offer, they don't have that opportunity. And so in New Orleans, we will not use the contingency addendum. We will put, if we want it to be closed predication, we'll write language in the additional terms and conditions. And we'll say, this is a closed predicated offer, meaning that they cannot accept another offer. The buyer does have a house to sell, but a seller is only going to do that if it's under contract. I've had multiple situations where the buyer's house is past inspection period, for example, it's past appraisal, it's just waiting to close. A seller's much more willing to accept what we would call a closed predicated offer in New Orleans. But now that I have studied your forms in the last week in Baton Rouge and Lafayette, the form itself is, if it's A, it's a closed predicated offer. If it's B, it's an open predicated offer. So that's what those terms are. I thought maybe more of you would be familiar with those terms, which would help explain how these forms are really different. But you're not. So I want to be sure y'all are clear. You need to find the form that you would use. Whether you're a buyer or as a listing agent, you need to be familiar with this form. I think that there's been, I haven't, really dived into the statistics, but I feel like in Louisiana, we have had more contingent offers submitted maybe in the last 6 months because it's taken longer for people to sell their houses and they're having to write them more. And that's kind of how I've realized by questions that agents have called on that they really didn't understand. A lot of our agents didn't really understand or hadn't really read the forms and understood what was in there because of all the different questions. So anybody have a question about contingency?
Betsy, I'll just add a couple comments.
Okay, please. Oops. Hello?
While we're waiting, I had a question. I wrote on the open predicated offer, you have to abide by the number of hours, and the closed predicated offer, you cannot accept another offer. For how long? Ever? I mean,
okay, so tell me where you're located.
Lafayette.
Okay, so the Lafayette form is, let's look at, again, it's virtually the same as the Baton Rouge one. All right. So when you pick A, then really your timeline, let's see, the following paragraphs are to be added between buyer and sellers. Okay. Okay. It's based on what you put in A as to when the closing is supposed to be for the house they need to sell. So if the closing comes and goes and it doesn't sell, then your contract, your addendum is dead. And that's why if that happens, you've got to, as the buyer agent, in order to keep the deal afloat, you've got to write a new addendum and change it from A to B. And the seller, of course, has to agree to that. So your timeline ending is going to be whatever you put as to when the closing is for that house that has to sell. That makes
Okay, so
sense?
the open one is due to number of hours, and the closed one all depends on when it closes and sells, and it's a done deal.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Betsy, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened, but so I would just say the easy way to remember the open and closed predication. If it's open predication, it means that the seller is open to receive other offers still. So they can still do that, and then it's under the constraints that are set forth. How long they need to give the buyer to respond, but that's an easy way to remember that. And then if you're on the listing side and you get a closed predicated offer, it may seem like you're really um, like confining your seller to those terms, but it's in my opinion it's not, and I'll tell you why. Most most of the contingencies in any purchase agreement are closed. So you get a regular offer on a property. The financing contingency is definitely closed. Your seller can't receive other offers while you're waiting to get the financing contingency removed, or appraisal contingency, or inspection contingency. Right? Those are all closed. So if a buyer's property is already under contract, there's a chance that they may be paying cash for the property you're listing. And if the only contingency is their sale, that's probably less risky than a normal contract where there's financing contingencies and appraisals and things like that. So really weigh it out. But sometimes a closed contingency past an inspection and especially past appraisal is can be a pretty good offer. Excellent, even.
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody got any questions for Mark?
And
Okay.
I would agree with what you're saying. We are seeing many more contingencies than we used to.
I haven't looked through the SkySlope files, but I just know I've had more questions from our agents than I ever have before.
Yeah, I haven't actually kept, like a ledger, but just from what I see, I would say definitely a high percentage of offers coming in with that are contingent on other sales.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So it is very important that you understand the paperwork and the language in the paperwork and what it means. All right. So now we're going to move into reverse offers. How many of you have ever heard the term reverse offer? I want you to participate here.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I heard you say it the other day.
Okay.
I think I've heard it before, but
I think I have.
Okay.
Do you want me to say what it is, or you want to say
No,
it?
no, I'll do that. All right. So those of you who said you think you have, do you have a good idea of what it is, do you think? Or just you've heard the term?
it's where like listing agent will reach out to a particular buyer's agent with like an offer from the seller to purchase the
Okay.
house.
All right. All right. So let's look at some slides. So this is something that I learned more than 10 coach and national coach, and they were very big on teaching this strategy. And when the market is hot and things are flying off the shelf, it's not something you probably need to know, but that's not where we are. Now, I can tell you that I would say there are very few realtors that even know of the concept. And so if you are a listing agent and you are writing this, once I explain it to you, you are probably going to have to explain it to the buyer agent because they're not going to understand. So just assume that they don't understand and be patient and take the time to explain. Don't just send it to them and not have a conversation, or you're probably going to be dead in the water. Okay, so what is a reverse offer? It really means that the seller is initiating an offer to the buyer. Okay. Instead of the seller waiting for a buyer to make an offer to them. So, when are they useful? It's when there has been an interested buyer without an offer being written. So let's say you know that the buyer agent has showed the house to the same buyer maybe 2 times. That would be an example of maybe they're an interested buyer. Or it could be based on feedback. I know more agents than ever are calling the buyer agents after they've shown the property asking for feedback, or they've gotten written feedback from a tool that goes out automatically, and the feedback is my clients are interested. But then you wait, and nothing happens. So that is an opportunity when it might be useful. It might be useful with investors, and when you know that there are multiple interested parties, then you might do a reverse offer. But let me say this on that last one. Please do not write reverse offers to more than one buyer at a time, because what happens if you do and both buyers accept it? You're in big trouble, because now your seller has accepted two offers on the same property, and that is a big mess. Okay, so this is when they might be useful. All right, next slide. So first job is you got to explain it to the seller, and you got to let them know, hey, what would you take for the property? Are you interested in making an offer yourself to, John Smith? I know that John Smith has seen the property with his agent a couple times, or I know that John Smith is interested, but just, moving slowly. Or it could be a situation where you're a dual agent. You know your client, the buyer client, is interested, but they're just dragging their feet. So you have to get the seller on board first and foremost. All right, agency considerations. So just remember, the listing agent represents the seller, the buyer agent represents the buyer. If you're writing an offer as the listing agent to submit to the buyer, you're still submitting it to the buyer's agent. You're not representing the buyer. So nothing changes in that perspective. All right, let's look at the next slide. So, what are the steps to writing a reverse offer? You are going to, as the listing agent, write the contract. The seller is going to sign the contract first. If you recall, and sometimes I have to remind agents when I'm talking to them about this, but if you look on a purchase agreement where the buyer normally signs, there's 2 boxes there. One says buyer and one says seller. Well, why would they have seller there if there's no such thing as a seller writing an offer to a buyer? That's because in the industry, this is something that is done. And even in Louisiana, or the forms committee for the state, the LREC, would not have included that in the top portion of the contract, on the last page where the first person signs who's making the offer. All right, so you're the listing agent. You're preparing the contract. Seller's going to sign it first. You're going to send it to the buyer agent, and you're going to pick up the telephone and explain what's going on. Okay? Because they're going to be dumbfounded. And then what happens? The buyer's either going to accept the offer that you have written, they're going to reject the offer, or they're going to counter the offer. So it's just all backwards. So if when you have that conversation with the buyer agent and explain to them, and like I said, I would say, the vast majority of agents do not know what this is. So just, if you just assume that they don't understand, you'll be better off. And then you let them know, my seller, these are the terms that my seller is willing to sell the property. We know that your buyer is interested. And so we would like to make an offer to them. I'm just suggesting that you don't make it a really quick expiration time, like hours. You might even need to give them a couple of days because for whatever reason, that buyer has been slow to move on their own. And so rushing them to make a rush decision probably not going to come out well. They're probably going to need a little more time than if it was the other way around. As the buyer agent getting a reverse offer, your client needs to do something. They need to accept, reject, or counter. I'm going to go back for 1 second to the multiple offer situation. If you are a listing agent and you get multiple offers and you send all those offers to your seller and they make a decision on what they're going to do, every single one of the offers that that seller does not accept needs to be signed as rejected. I got on one deal, I think I got 19 offers. And on another one, I had about 32 offers. Boy, was that a lot of work. Uploading them all into DocuSign and getting the seller to sign rejected. But that is a part of what we're supposed to do. So I digress. But in this case, the buyer agent, that buyer should accept, reject, or counter the offer. Next slide. So what is the key takeaway? The key takeaway is a reverse offer simply states the terms under which the seller will sell the property. It is as simple as that. So there's no special form. It was just a handful of slides. I taught you the whole strategy in about 5 minutes. But it is something to keep in mind. I have talked to several EXP agents one-on-one. They did not know what I was talking about, but they ended up doing it. Does it work? It does work. Does it work all the time? No, it doesn't work all the time. There's reasons why a lot of times buyers get very interested in the property, but they're just too afraid to do anything. So this is just to try to get them, to move forward. And that also lets them know what the seller is willing to accept. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the best deal the seller will make. That buyer still can counter the offer. But a lot of times the folks who use this strategy, they are writing an offer that's probably might be lower than an initial offer from a buyer who's going to anticipate a lot of back and forth. I'm not saying that again, that's the way it always is, and it doesn't have to be like that. But if that seller is motivated, this is a strategy that you should consider when the house has been on the market a while. The seller really does need to sell it, and you have a buyer who's showing some real interest, but just not moving forward. So, do you have any questions?
Hey Betsy, I've got an example of one time when I used that.
Great.
A buyer had come along when the property first came on the market. I was a listing agent. They offered, the seller couldn't come to terms. The seller thought it was too low. Well, a few weeks later, the seller reconsidered and decided to do a reverse offer. The buyers said at that point, they'd gotten their feelings hurt a little bit and they weren't real happy. They ended up countering, but eventually we came to terms and it worked. So I think that's an example. If a seller wants to revive some old negotiations, it could work.
That's great. Great example. All right. Nobody's got a question. It is pretty simple. It's just wrapping your head around something that you probably haven't heard before. All right. Does anybody have a question about any of the 4 things that we've talked about? Escalation clauses, contingency addendums, multiple offers, reverse offers.
I don't have a question, but I will probably have to go back and revisit the contingencies because I have a client who is moving from California to New Orleans. She has to sell her property in California first. So and she wants to do a contingency offer if she finds something here that she likes. So I will probably have to revisit that again just to hear it and understand it.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. All right. Anybody else got a question? We got one more. Let's see. Go back a slide. Is the rally slide? Yeah. Okay. If you have not bought your rally tickets, please buy your rally tickets. I'm not saying we're going to be sold out, but I can tell you that in the last two, but I don't know, we might. We really might. We're very excited. Ticket sales were a little slow at the beginning, but we have now in the last 2 weeks, there's probably been 40 tickets bought. More 40 at more just in the last 2 weeks. So we are expecting a fantastic turnout. I'm just cannot stress enough, I think, how important it is for everybody to attend this. It is not where you have to travel a long distance. There are people that are coming in on Sunday and spending the night, but you definitely don't have to do that unless you're coming from North Louisiana. The speaker lineup is just phenomenal, and it will be a day that we can celebrate each other, and that there's going to be learning to be had from top-notch speakers. It's always fantastic to hear what other people are doing in other parts of the country. And then, of course, 3 of the top leadership at EXP. You do not want to miss this for $59, including a lunch. So scan the QR code. If you don't do that now, come back into the world. I would really encourage you to not wait until the last minute, because we're hoping that we can sell this thing out. And maybe if you're not in Baton Rouge and you need, maybe some sharing rides would be great as well. So last call. Does anybody have any questions about anything we've talked about today? All right. Well, we thank you so much for your participation. We will have the recording up. Tell your fellow EXP friends that were not in here today that it is a recording that they really should listen to.
And where can they get the where can we get the recording?
Thank you.
Laura?
It's on the screen.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. In the yellow screen.
This is the website where it's at, or you can click on this code from your phone. It should open it if you click on the QR code.
And y'all should save that URL. That's where all of our training stuff, all of our recordings are.
Okay. Well, I was never able to see the screen, so.
That's okay. Can you not? Still can't?
I mean, there's a black paragraph in front of it that's telling me different stuff so I've just been listening and taking notes. I was never able to see the actual screen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You can click on that black thing and it'll go away.
Here, I'll put the link in the chat. There you go.
Can you see the chat?
So this is where the recordings are, everybody. You got to scroll all the way down, and here they are. This will be under the Louisiana Skills Lab.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you all have any questions, you know where to find us in the world. Any one of us should be able to help you.
Thank y'all. Y'all have a great day.
Great day.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
All righty.